Welcome, everyone, to our Facebook live broadcast. I'm Steve Altition, Director of Client Partnerships here at Pacific Cascade Legal. And today we have a family attorney law, Kimberly Brown, to talk about why a no-fault divorce isn't exactly no fault, because there can be consequences when a spouse does bad acts. Well, that's a mouthful, Kimberly. How are you doing today?
I'm well. I'm well. I've actually appreciated the rain we have right here in the Pacific Northwest over the weekend and trying to be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed today. How about
Well,
yourself?
yeah. My backyard is a swamp. It is raining a lot, but it's Oregon, so what the heck?
What the heck?
What the heck? So this one had a history of me wanting to do this a little bit in that talked to a judge that we know that had something similar to this come up. And it was kind of like, there people say, well, it's no fault, so I'm not going to have any consequences because of anything I did. But that doesn't really right. So can we just kind of start with, what does no fault divorce mean, at least as to someone's ability to get divorced?
Sure. So in the timeline of history, it has not been all that long since many states had laws that in order for you to get a divorce, you had to have reasons for a divorce. And I was going to use the word just cause right now, but it's why we have no fault divorces now, is because it wasn't necessarily just cause.
Yeah.
You had to allege that a spouse was either mentally ill, had been unfaithful, or there was abuse in a marriage. And the problem with that was that there was two things that that were happening. First of all, many marriages that wanted to be divorced, parties that wanted to be divorced, didn't have any of those issues. But the other one, which was even more difficult and actually more harmful, was that sometimes all of those things might be true, or one of those things might be true, but you couldn't prove it. And so people ended up not being able to get married. And so there's a whole history behind it, which I'm really interested in, but I'm not sure everybody else is interested in. So what they did, though, was to go to what was called a no-fault state. And that is that if one person alleges that there are irreconcilable differences, meaning that you just are not going to be able to work it out, that's all it means. You're not going to be able to work it out. Then you can get a divorce now. And it's partly done to streamline the process, to allow people who want to get a divorce for whatever reasons. And there are just a myriad of reasons why people are no longer wanting to be married. Some have to do with addictions. Some have to do with finances. So this was a way to allow an easier route through the divorce process.
Yeah, and it seems like, in the old divorces, half of the testimony was just lurid about stuff that didn't,
Was
and it made people probably awfully uncomfortable having to go through that just to get a divorce.
right. And sometimes one of the parties would actually have to pick who was going to be the one who was the nefarious party, and they would work together to make the story dramatic enough so that the judge would allow the divorce to happen. Or another consequence was people had to travel to states that did allow divorces and live there. So Nevada was a state that most people would have heard about if they've heard of Duvall. You had to go live in 6 weeks in Nevada, and if you were 6 weeks resident in Nevada, you could get a divorce. But that put a lot of financial strain on different parties and was a lot of rigmarole for
Yeah.
something that seemed to people were trying to the government, let's put it this way, the government wanted to control that part of our lives in marriage, and the people said, no, we should be able to control our marital life. We should be able
Yeah.
to have some input into that.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. And Las Vegas grew up on divorces and
They
gambling, which,
did.
have a
They
little bit
did.
of a similarity. But having said that, No fault doesn't really mean no consequences, does it? I mean, you can do
No.
things that can come back to bite you in the rear.
Right. I think one of the things that's hard for clients when they're coming into divorce and stuff like that is a lot of the words we use in the legal system have terms of art. They have very definite meaning in the legal context that they may not have the same meaning in general conversation with your friends. So no fault divorce does not mean you can do anything you want to, get away with it, and they're going to give you a divorce with no consequences. No fault in the legal context just basically means you don't have to have done something that the court would consider wrong, immoral, anything like that in order to ask for a divorce. But that does not mean that your conduct, and only certain kinds of conduct, are not going to be considered in the division of assets, in how the children may or may not have parenting time, or how much parenting time, or who gets custody. So it's not about getting the divorce, it's about how is the divorce result going to come about?
Yeah.
What's going to be in there?
So let's talk about property first.
Okay.
I call it bad acts.
Correct.
What, what sorts of things you better not do?
Right.
Not only will you not get a present from Santa, but you may get something much worse than the
Yeah,
judge.
it'll be much worse than a coal in your stocking.
Yeah, and can some of that even be before the marriage or during the marriage?
Yes, yes. It's a very fact specific issue, this, because one of the things that most comes about is spending of money by one spouse, either for without the knowledge of the other spouse, and or not for the benefit of the marriage. So somebody decides that they're going to go every weekend to Spirit Mountain and gamble, but they're telling a spouse that they're on a business trip. And when it comes time to get to go through the discovery process of the divorce, this comes revealed. Nobody knew about it for 2 or 3 years. It can come up and say, look, you were gambling this money away and it wasn't for the benefit of the marriage. So we're going to try to claw back some bigger half for the spouse that didn't know that the money was being wasted. That can be also something that won't be happening if it's before the divorce, because if your spouse has a credit card problem, which is another big financial issue, if your spouse has a credit card problem, and you see a new couch coming into your house, lots of new dishes, sometimes the courts will say, well, they may not have told you that they were spending all this money, but you got a brand new suit once a month, or you had a brand new 98-inch TV. That should have informed you to at least inquire about what was happening. So if, but I had a client that whose spouse spent over $350,000 in a single year over a gambling addiction, and it had happened 2 years before the marriage. But because we were able to show that the house was in that party's name, and they were remortgaging the house without the consent of the other spouse, we got some of it back. So not all of it, because that's a lot of money for many people, especially 20 years ago, to lose. So so those are the kinds of bad acts that we look at. So
what about, I don't know if it's the opposite of spending and wasting money, but what about hiding money?
yeah.
Just so, I'm going to get divorced, so I'm going to shovel some of this away. Or if you're a business, you can do a lot of things if you go into business. And you got to be kind of careful there, don't you?
You do, because it isn't really all that easy to hide assets in the global perspective, in the global view of stuff, okay? But the problem is, it is expensive to uncover it.
Yeah.
And so that's where the difficulty comes in. You know that somebody for 3 years made $500,000 gross, and then all of a sudden, all of the savings and that you knew to be there, or all of the business accounts that had so much money in them a year ago, have nothing in them now, and they're only making $250,000. You know, that raises some concern. But discovery is expensive. And so you have to get all of the documents that you can. Sometimes the other party's reluctant to turn them over because they're hiding stuff, so they don't want you to have the documents. So you have to subpoena the documents, which is more expensive than if the other party voluntarily turns it over. But you also have to go to court a lot to get contempt proceedings started if they refuse to turn over documents. Once you get all the documents that you need, sometimes you need a forensic accountant to go through the paperwork if it's not showing up very easily just by looking it over, which it does actually most of the time, believe it or not, but sometimes it doesn't. And the biggest issue about this, Steve, is that if the issue was discoverable during the divorce, okay.
Right.
So if somebody was hiding assets, but I could have found it as your attorney if I had the right information, but you didn't have the money to pay for me to get the right information, the courts will deny any kind of fixes after the divorce has been finalized. So it's very important that we discover this stuff during the divorce proceedings and not hope that it comes up later down the road.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like it also then it puts some of the responsibility on each party.
It does.
Because I've always kind of wondered about this. I know that there's sort of an automatic thing that the court does when there's filing, and that's both sides have to, reveal some stuff.
Right.
So that can help, can it?
It does. The court says that when the court has this just changed actually in my practice time. It didn't used to be there, but during the time that I've been practicing in the last 20 some years, the court has entered in what's called an automatic financial restraining order. And sometimes when we talk about it, we say there's going to be an automatic restraining order, and everybody's eyes open because we all hear about that with domestic violence, and that's what it kind of sounds like. But this is not that. This is about, the court says, as soon as the petitioner files the paperwork, their petition, they are handed papers that basically say, you have this automatic restraining order and you must abide by it. And that is that you can't change, stop paying, change beneficiaries, cancel property, beneficiary, or I'm sorry, life insurance, like if you have life insurance or auto insurance or medical insurance, those can't be canceled. You're not allowed to let things lapse because you're not paying for it. You can't change the beneficiaries that affect your spouse. So if your spouse is the beneficiary of your life insurance, you can't change it. If your spouse is on your medical insurance through work, you can't cut her off or him off. And if your spouse has life insurance, if you have life insurance, you can't just stop paying your own life insurance if it benefits your spouse.
Yeah.
Like I said before, you can't change insurance policy beneficiaries for either the spouse or the minor children, and nor can you transfer. You can't transfer, destroy, or hide or get rid of property in which the spouse may have an interest, and you can't spend an extraordinary amount of money without the approval of the spouse. There are some caveats that say you can spend money to support yourself. So if you need to sell something to support yourself or pay your attorney fees, you can do that. But the court is going to look very carefully that you didn't sell the Corvette for 10 grand when the Corvette was worth 100 grand.
Yeah.
It used to be selling the Corvette for $1, but inflation.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And the son doesn't need that car that much.
That much, no.
The kind of overarching thing here seems to be, at least to me, that we're not saying you can't spend money, like you said,
right,
but you can't do something intentionally to gain an advantage in the divorce.
Right. Yeah, you can't use the money to get rid of something because you're mad at your spouse, but you also can't do something to change the beneficiary of your spouse for your spouse in order to punish them. And you can't transfer property into your own name or your parents' names or a child's name so that it doesn't come before the court. All of that. And really, it's about reasonableness and openness, transparency. So if you need to repair the roof of the house that you're living in that's a marital asset, then that's going to be allowed if the spouse doesn't agree to it in order to preserve the marital asset so that the house doesn't lose value, and the spouse who is waiting for their share of the equity still can get their share of the equity because the house retains its value.
So what kinds of specific things can the court do if a spouse is doing this and they've somehow made the value smaller for the spouse that's really the innocent spouse? I mean, what kind of ways can they do to fix that? Are there any ways to make it, how can they make it equitable?
Right. So Oregon's general rule, Oregon's a fair and equitable state. So basically that's what the judge has to use as their guideline as to how they're going to divide property. And how that generally is worked out by the court is 50-50. It's not the rule that it's 50-50, but that is generally what ends up happening in a fair and equitable, non-bad act kind of divorce, no fault divorce with really no fault in it. So that's the way. But what they will do often is that the court has authority to look at all of the property and all of the circumstances in a particular marriage. And so even property that may have been premarital property that was owned by one party over another, which is generally not included in a division of a marital estate. The value at the time of the marriage is not included at the time of the divorce. The court has authority to look at all property that is owned by the parent parties, regardless of whether it's owned by one or both, and may choose to give some property that theoretically is the property of one spouse and not the other, may choose to go ahead and say, you've got to sell this particular property that you thought was all your own and divide that or give it all to the spouse who's been harmed by your bad acts. And then they can also just look at what's there. If the property that is owned is all marital property, all owned and belonging to both parties, the court can say, instead of 50-50, we're going to do 75-25 or 60-40, like that, just to make it so that the money that was wasted by one party or hidden by one party is made whole, that the spouse can be made whole that didn't do the bad acts. Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be necessarily that you already took property or used property in a way that didn't benefit the marriage. Sometimes just your attempt to hide property or not reveal property, sometimes that is significant enough that the court will say, as a consequence of this, we're going to do some different kind of division than an equal. We're going to give a lion's share, we call it in the courtroom, a lion's share of the property to the person who was not trying to do bad things, to the spouse who was harmed again by the party's action. Award of attorney fees at the end of a case is another way. It really, what I have found, almost more than just revealing the assets. One of the things that really is important is that when you are found by the court to be non-truthful in one area, like hiding assets or not revealing assets or underreporting, the court's going to have trouble believing your side of the case if you're
Yeah.
up there testifying under oath, and you and your spouse have a slightly different version of events or whatnot. Your credibility is really going to have a lot of there's not going to be a lot of credibility there. There just isn't. I mean, if you're willing to lie under things that you're obligated to do even outside the courtroom, there's concern that you might lie inside the courtroom.
Yeah.
The court has authority to issue financial penalties if there's if somebody's hidden money and maybe there might not be enough assets available, that because of the bad acts, the court can issue financial penalties like an equalizing judgment, and say, well, there's no money, there's no, maybe there's not the income doesn't justify a certain amount of spousal support. So, but if this property hadn't been hidden, spent, disposed of in some way, there would have been an easier way of living. So the court may say, I'm going to issue a judgment for the amount that you wasted, that your spouse was entitled to have. And, that's a 25-year judgment gaining 9% interest.
Yeah.
Year after year. And your taxes can be seized, your income tax returns, wages could be garnished. All of that stuff is there if you are thinking that I'm just going to try to hide this so that I can have this money and the other person can't get any of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So on the non-monetary side, are there things you better not do or should be awfully, concerned if you're doing them, when it comes to things like the kids or that kind of stuff, even the spouse?
Right. I would say that the two biggest areas that affect child custody or parenting time are domestic violence and addiction. So the statute, when it looks at the best interest of the children, is pretty clear that if you have been found to commit domestic violence, that custody shouldn't even be on the table for you. That's something that you're just going to don't even try to seek. And if you do try to seek and are unreasonable in it, there's a possibility of some financial penalties along with the fact that you aren't going to prevail on the issue of custody. But it also can affect your parenting time. So it's not just custody. If your children cannot be determined to be safe in your care and custody because of what you've done in the past up until the divorce, then your parenting time will be supervised. If you aren't willing to do that, it will be restricted, sometimes to the point of no parenting time until you go through anger management classes, until it's shown that you can be safe for the children and or the spouse. The domestic violence doesn't just have to be on the children. Your conduct with your spouse can also restrict how your access to the children is, depending on the particular facts.
Can it's not rising necessarily to domestic violence, but during the divorce, if you're just, a horse's ass and you don't, you've decided, well, I'm just not going to let you see the kids, or I'm going to, rule everything, or stuff like that. That can come back also.
It can. And we really thank you for bringing that up, Steve, because I think that is so important. It comes out of the mouth of the person who's restricting the kids' access as I'm trying to protect the children.
Yeah.
But in many instances, has nothing to do with protecting the children as much as it has to do with punishment of the other spouse for whatever reason. They want to move on. There's a mental health with the person that they can't see what's happening. And Steve, I had this conversation the other day with someone about family law isn't always about the law. It's about the family.
Yeah.
And we spend so much time talking about the law that we forget about the family. And it's really important that we remember that if you have children, your family will not be the same at the end of the divorce, but it will still be family.
Yeah.
And how that family works and functions is dependent on parents deciding that their kids are more important than whatever's going on between them as parents. So your kids learn relationship from how you behave. Your kids learn self-worth and how much they are valued by how the parents behave. And so when parents choose to be assholes, and I use that word intentionally because of the harm it does to the children, then the court will look at that and try to mitigate that as best they can. And it's a very hard area for the courts, I think, because, how can you can't monitor somebody's conduct day after day, and you can't necessarily prevent the harm. Sometimes the harm has to happen before you can try to repair it. But people need to beware. If you act in a way that is harmful to your children because you are trying to keep them from the other parent, because you're trying to create a hostile relationship between the children and the parent, the courts can change custody and will do so.
Yeah. Yeah. And that probably more than the financial issues, that piece of bad acting transpires through the divorce, past the divorce, to, the rest of your life. Because you can do something following the divorce, doing all those things, and there's going to be consequences, at least on the side of finances. Typically, not always, but typically it ends at the divorce. And so it's not like, okay, you've done something bad, now give me the house.
Right. No, the bad acts will follow you in the child custody and parenting time arena. So one parent may have addiction, mental health issues, or domestic violence issues that could interfere with it, or interfere with your parenting time and or your right to custody, or that same spouse, in a different divorce, it will be, I'm trying to really mess up your relationship with your children because I'm so mad at you.
Yeah.
And that too will continue until your children are 18. Really, the law has authority over children until they're 18. And what parents don't realize, Steve, is that even when the court steps out of it, your children don't forget. What happened.
The punishment comes from the kids.
The kids will, kids won't want to see you. And even if you've been the total custodian parent, if you've alienated a child, and I use that term in the regular kind of language, not the court language. If you've kept your children from one spouse and you've misrepresented why, the kids are going to find out about it. They're smart. They're going to figure it out. And I tell all parents that I'm dealing with who are the parent that is at the on the side that the kids are trying to be kept from them, don't punish your kids. You just let your kids know you're there however you can, that you love them. And I promise you, and this is a promise I've always been able to keep, Steve, I promise you the kids will return to you as soon as they can. And it's been a promise I've been able to keep if the parent who is being, whose relationship with the kids is being interfered with, is able to stay as continue to being a good parent, even when the other parent isn't being one.
Yeah.
So,
wow, we've just blown through this time, but I just kind of hit one more thing, and that is almost all of the stuff you've talked about is an incredibly good reason to have a good lawyer, because you need to do things. You're going to have to start, they don't know necessarily, what do I do? What do I do to stop this?
Right.
But the idea of, and I think where I see sometimes parents go wrong the other way, is reacting. You're the victim. Now you react, and you can just make things worse. I mean, by doing that.
That's why, when I say the promise that I can keep is to say the children will come back to you, is that it requires you to take the high road.
Yeah.
because the kids, especially little kids, but kids understand their self-worth when they're little by identification with their parents. So when one parent says, your dad is blah, 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 all negative, the child says, I'm half my dad, so I'm half bad.
Yeah.
And when the dad responds in kind and says, your mom, blah, 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 what the child says is, oh man, I'm half my mom. So if they're both bad, I must be all bad.
Yeah.
And that's the damage you do to your kid's psyche.
That's a point we didn't even talk about. And that's a great point. The
Yeah.
consequences aren't just for you, the bad actor, they're for everybody.
Everybody around you.
Yeah.
Everybody around you. Think about your friends who've gotten divorced, that you were close to both friends, and remember how hard that was for you outside of the divorce arena. You're not in the case or anything like that, but how that affects you and your relationship with them. And now think of a 6-year-old in that same position.
Wow. We have to go now. I could talk about this for a whole another half hour. But
yeah, I think there's a lot here to continue thinking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Kimberly, again, thank you so much. You're just sitting down, talking about this kind of stuff and the consequences and what really to do and not to do is just really important information. So thank you very much for being here today.
Thanks for asking.
Oh, and we're going to find another cool topic and we're going to talk about that because you are a great person with words. There's another word for that, but I'm not going to use it. And so am I. So what the hell? So everyone, thank you for joining us today. If you have any further questions on today's topic, you can post it here. We can get you connected with Kimberly. And until next time, stay safe, stay happy.